Hey, how are you? I'm Brian Junker in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and this is week 4 of the Coursera course, Introduction to Music Production. I'm going to tell you a little bit about using a compressor on a djembe in a larger piece of music. Here we go. The piece that I'm going to demonstrate compression with is a lovely African folk song called Mangode Ala. There's a guitar part, a djembe part, and a piano part, and we'll hear a little bit of it before we get started. You can see below that the djembe has two microphones on it. There's a microphone near the head of the djembe on top, and another microphone underneath the djembe. We'll work on compression on the microphone underneath the djembe first. This is what it sounds like. This is the compressed sound. It's a very woofy sound. It's the heavy, big amount of air that the djembe moves when you hit the head. Here's the compressor that was applied to that lower microphone. There's also a little gain stage afterwards to make up some gain that's lost in the compressor. First thing you'll notice is that the threshold is set at about minus 20 dB, and the djembe hits are crossing that minus 20 dB threshold fairly frequently. Below that threshold there's no amplification or attenuation of the level, and above that threshold we have a ratio of about 3 to 1. So that's a moderate amount of compression. Okay. The other thing you'll see is that we're taking a sample of about a millisecond to calculate the RMS level of the signal. And the release time is set fairly large. It's 100 milliseconds. That's a fairly high release time. You can see that the attack time is not so big. It's about a tenth of a millisecond. The release time has a bigger effect on the sound of that woofy sound, although as you increase the release time above about 100 milliseconds, there really isn't much effect. If you decrease the release time, then there's a pretty substantial effect. And down here, you can hear that the djembe gets very tight sounding, and there's a lot of unpleasant overtones that are generated. And 100 milliseconds seems about right to produce some nice sustain and keep the sound of the djembe fairly round. The attack time doesn't have as much of effect. You can move the attack time around a bit. And because there isn't really much in the way of transients down underneath the djembe, when you hit the djembe, you really don't get much of an effect of a short or a fast attack. Here's a very slow attack. It sounds very similar to what we have with a faster attack down here, even an attack right at 0 milliseconds. So we'll leave that up where it was, about a tenth of a millisecond. And that produces a pretty nice sound. What was that? Okay. So once that's done, let's hear what it sounds like without the compressor, and then with the compressor, so we can see what the effect of the compressor is. So here I've taken the compressor out, I've bypassed it. This is the natural sound of the djembe through that bottom microphone. And now the compressor's back in. And I think the compressor's done some good here. It's actually rounded out the tone down there, brought it up a little, made it a little clearer. Now let's switch to the microphone on top of the djembe, the one near the head. That has a nice crisp sound with a pretty short attack. And actually I didn't set this compressor up the way I want to, so why don't we start by setting it up again. The threshold is again around minus 20 dB, which seems fine. But we're going to increase the ratio. It's about 1.5 to 1 here. We're going to run this all the way up to about, let's say 4 to 1. So let's grab the slider here and move it up to about 4 to 1. It's a moderately large amount of compression. It's not quite limiting yet, but it's a moderately large amount of compression. Okay. As for RMS length, we're going to run that all the way down to 0, so we just catch the peaks. Okay. And the attack will take that down to 0.05 milliseconds instead of a tenth of a millisecond. And the release, well, let's try about 50 milliseconds on it. Okay. So that should give the hits on the top of the djembe just a little more definition. We're going to be rounding off the attacks of the transients a little bit, but not too much, and still have a decent amount of sustain. So here's what the djembe top microphone sounds like naturally without the compression, and here it is with the compression again. I think the difference isn't as great here as it was with the mic under the djembe. I guess one thing you'll notice is that the compression reduced the level a little, so we'll increase the output gain a little to make the overall loudness sound roughly the same with and without the compression. Now let's put this back in the mix with the other instruments, and we'll hear how it sounds all together. Well, that's about it. I hope you found it interesting. It took a little bit more than 5 minutes, but I think it was a good experiment to try to compress the bass part of a djembe and the treble part of a djembe and see how that fits together with the other instruments in my recording. I look forward to your comments. See you later.